Welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. I am Jeff Hilimire, and with my friend Alex Gonzalez, we explore topics that help you be your best self. And we also get to chat with some great guests. So join us now on the Jeff and Alex podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. We are on all your favorite podcast platforms, and of course on YouTube. I'm Alex Gonzalez, and hello, Jeff Hilimire. How are you?
I'm doing good, Alex. How are you?
Good. I see you're at your world headquarters there today.
I am. I'm back, and you can see my books are back in the background, which I think is the topic we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So what's this thing about books? Ever since I've known you, I mean, I think you consume a book every half day or something like that.
No, I tell you what. Here's what's interesting. I read a lot now. But I didn't always. I would always read maybe 4 to 5 books a year. If it was an important business book, but. And I always like to say, whenever it's something that I don't spend time on, I like to make sure I don't say that I didn't have time instead of, I didn't make the time.
Yeah, that's true.
So I didn't make the time to read books in the past. There were other things that I thought were more important, and maybe they were more important. But I was thinking about this in anticipation of chatting with you about books. I actually think it was either Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. I think it might have been Bill Gates, and the amount of books that he reads. This might have been 4 or 5 years ago. And I was like, I ought to try that and see what would happen if I prioritized reading books. And so I think it was like 2015 or 2016, I started reading more. And I think I averaged about 3 a month. And then in 2018, I gave myself the challenge to read a book a week, average a book a week. So in 2018, I read.
I thought it was daily, so I'm not as impressed anymore.
Well, right. I'm a little impressed because I can't do it anymore. I don't average near a book a week any longer. But yeah, so that sort of kicked off my renewed love affair with reading. What do you think you do in a year?
Oh, geez. I don't know. It really varies. It's nowhere near. If I get a book, I could go kind of last year, maybe. I don't know. I can't even remember because everything kind of blends together. And I'm really bad at starting multiple books and then having 5 different streams of consciousness that I come back and have to reread it. So it's definitely not one a week. If I don't even know if it's 1 a month anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for me, and I don't know when do you read your books? Or what do you have it in your routine, like in the mornings or in the evenings?
I don't have a good routine. I do read every night before going to sleep, but just a little bit because then I get tired. But it's almost like a way to make me more tired.
And see, that's my thing. I used to read in the evening. That would be it. And we've talked. I don't know if we have on the show before talking about different habits. And I'm a natural night owl, and then I've only pushing to the last minute to go to sleep. And so what happens is, which is not necessarily the healthiest thing, by the time I'm about to go to bed, if literally what would happen is I open up a book and 2 pages into it, I'm out. It just my brain slows down so much that it stopped. Now, what helped last year and into this year, I started getting it was not that long ago. I started finally getting into audiobooks. And in fact, I finished up Imagine It Forward, which the Beth Comstock book, and that's how I kind of consumed that. And I'm like, okay, I got it now, and I'm going to start consuming that audio because I used to have a pretty decent commute, and be in the car all the time. And then the pandemic hit, and that just stopped. Yeah. Now I need to reprioritize it because you and I discussed before. I'm kind of getting into the whole podcast consumption and all that. So I have this probably bigger list than I know to do with in terms of books. But that's the thing. It used to be about, I would have the book on the nightstand, and my wife would get me these she got me this thick, in fact, in the fiction side, she got me this thick book for It, because we were watching when the movies came out, and I used to be a huge. We'll talk about this Stephen King nut, and I just go half a page and I'm out. So anyways. That's a neat problem.
I would say at least a third are audible for me. But that's changed a lot with COVID because it used to be driving to work. So I would drive and, maybe you average an hour a day of driving either to work back or to meetings. And I would just, devour books that way. When I was running more or not with someone. So there was all these times I would find Audible helpful. But what I have tried, especially on weekends, is to sit with either a physical book or a Kindle and read in the living room so that my kids see that.
Yeah, that's good.
It's so easy for them never to see you read, and so I want to build reading into
Well,
their
and that's
habit.
good. Now, and that's one thing I will say. My kids are massive, consumers of books too. I mean, all of them. My oldest one probably a little less now, but he was. I mean, he could. We'd go on a trip and on the airplane, he'd be done with 2 books or something like that if it's a long trip. But
Yep.
all 3 of them are like that now, and I'm happy for my Mills in particular. And actually all 3 of them. But during the pandemic, they actually consumed a lot of books. So, which I think is important. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It's getting into the habits of it. I think there's something about reading the book too. It's one thing when I'm in a forced environment like the car or whatever, and you just, the consumption is a good distraction as well as a consuming the content. But there's something about reading it too in terms of reading styles, like ability to skim, um, you know, areas real quick and then
Yeah.
slow down on others, and you can't do it on an audiobook. And so, anyway, so I'll figure it out.
Yeah. And on that note, like my wife reads at least twice as fast as I do. And so I think I must be a slowish reader, which definitely doesn't help. But let's talk about what I'd love to hear is some of the books that have been the most important, most influential, most enjoyable,
Yeah.
in our lives. And I thought maybe we would start with fiction.
And we're gonna, and obviously not that it's fiction, but we'll exclude books of our friends, or else I'd have
Yes,
to go for everything,
that's right.
anything from the 5 Day Turnaround and the entire
Yeah,
series of Jeff Hilimire books, or we know some of our friends who have published
that's right.
books. Of course, automatically you'd have to talk about my unwritten, yet to be
Mhm.
published book is already your favorite before it's even out.
That's right. The
So we will
manuscript.
make it even and say like it have to be none from our, immediate family.
Perfect. Let's do that. All right. So you mentioned Stephen King. Is there
Yeah,
a
it's funny.
particular book?
It's interesting. It's so hard to me to refer it down. When I was a teenager, I remember I would consume Stephen King books like crazy. I was just into it, and I think it ties that this whole movie producer thing in my head in terms of just what his ability to create visualizations with it. But I can't think of any one specific book that I would say stands out because honestly,
Yeah.
it's been so long since I've read
He's
them.
he's one of those that there's so much,
Yeah.
and so much was so good. I got into King later in life, and I would have to say he's probably my favorite author now. But I bet I didn't read a
Wow.
Stephen King book until at least 35 years old, but maybe more recently.
And then actually, as you mentioned that, my wife did get me the big thick It book, which for those who've watched the movie, if you know, and have you read It?
That's the one I haven't read for different reasons, but I haven't gotten to that one.
And apparently, it's the movies, of course, are the new movies apparently are pretty incredible. But apparently, even with 2 movies, that the book is so much even deeper into so much of the
Mhm.
content that it produces, and there's all these storylines, and there's a lot of depth around just social comment. There's a lot going on in there, but yeah, no, I think one thing I would love to go back and reread is The Shining. I mean,
It's a
in
great one.
terms of yeah, so yeah,
The-
but Stephen King was definitely, but when I was younger, and I honestly, that's one thing that I miss now. When I was younger, Stephen King was when I was a teenager. And then I went through a John Grisham phase until they started becoming a little like, okay, this is the same story.
Same story,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, but I don't want to dig on too much. But I would say if I would have had a favorite, I mean, I did the Dan Brown books, and the fact he only produced like 4
Mhm.
or 5, but with Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons in particular, I mean, if I think about fiction and just like I could not put it down.
Yeah,
I just
right.
was my wife and I we would buy the book, and this is when we were married, and we would be like fighting about who's going to read the book first.
Yeah.
That from a fiction standpoint, that probably stands out right now as probably one of my favorite. And I miss, because I can't tell you how long, and now I'm so impatient that I don't let a new author settle
Mhm.
in. But I'm curious to what you say, because I miss that feeling of
Mhm.
having one of those fiction books just to escape, that just
Yeah.
drags you, that pulls you into the story.
Yeah.
You just cannot put it down. And I'm still searching for that author for for fiction.
So my author for that, although I will say The Stand is my favorite King book, but my favorite author for what you just described is John Sandford. He writes, I think he's like into like 25 or 26 of them, but it's the Prey series, like Night Prey. They always have Prey in the title, but it's it's a and I won't say detective, but it's definitely like the main character, works for the police force, and now maybe the marshals. But those are like so fast paced. I'll read them in a day and a half. But he's the only author I look forward to when it comes out. It's a little trashy in terms of like it's not a meaningful story, maybe the way that some of the authors. But I will say that the book, my favorite book of all time, I actually read it in high school. It's The Lords of Discipline by Pat Conroy. I mean, I probably read it, over 5 times, so maybe closer to 10 over my lifetime, but just unbelievable. So that's my favorite. And then I have to mention Ender's Game, which my company Dragon Army is based off of. Ender's Game. Right. It's really one of the only science fiction books I enjoy because I'm not a big science fiction fan, but it's not science fiction-y as much as it is sort of humanity. But anyway, so those are my top.
Anybody in your family or anybody get into the whole Harry Potter series or any of those?
Yeah, I probably read the first 5, maybe 6. My family's obsessed with Harry Potter.
Okay.
I ended up trailing off toward the end. What about you?
Not me, but I know within the family. I mean, and several of those series. In fact, Ender's Game, I'm pretty sure, is somewhere upstairs. When you have 3 boys, a lot of those sci-fi series, in particular, become big hits, and it was pretty cool too, see them actually being passed down from one brother to the next. But yeah, but
let's talk about.
And by the way, I forgot to mention, I used to be into the whole Tom Clancy world when that was out there.
I don't think I ever read a Tom Clancy.
That's when it was good to be able to scan because it was so crazily detailed that they'd be describing some submarine in like 4 pages and you scan it. But those are pretty good.
Here's something interesting though. As you say that, I find there are a couple Stephen King books that are deep like that, but I find by and large he relies on dialogue so much more. And so I find they flow, but most people's perception of King is, they're so dense and he'll talk about a tree for 5 pages. And
no,
I feel the opposite about King.
No, I think what it is because he describes the moment. And as King is someone where you just have to, I have not done it in an audiobook. I think you have to read it.
Yeah.
And you have to let your mind just go to where, and I think he's just such a brilliant writer that he knows he's writing in a way that your fears are unique to you, but he writes in a way that it triggers whatever that fear is, that you don't even know exists. And I think that's what's so brilliant about him. I mean, to be able to me, that's just the sign of such an incredible fiction author, to pull an emotion out of you through just his words in such a deep way is just pretty amazing.
Well, that's a good segue, I think, into maybe
business,
if you have maybe nonfiction before business, because there's a couple of what I would call nonfiction books that I love, and at the top of the list really is Stephen King's On Writing. So before I write any book, I've written 2, but as I've started the third, I read On Writing. It's Stephen King's story. It's his autobiography, but it's also mostly focused on how he writes. And I find it to be amazing. He talks about his process, how he thinks about, from the very basics to big themes. And it's very inspiring. And of course he writes it, so it flows. It's got great stories, but On Writing is way up there in terms of having an impact on me, mostly from writing my own books perspective.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I just wrote that down. I'm going to definitely get that one. How about that? This is good for me. This is a very selfish, podcast edition. For me, nonfiction, as I look through the list, there's several like history books that I've read either a while back or like 1776 and a few others that I like. But I realize a lot of my nonfiction is really business books as well too, including like Steve Jobs' biography, which I guess would still be I guess it's still considered business.
I would call it nonfiction. Yeah.
Oh, if it's nonfiction, yeah. I mean, a good biography like that, I just love, and it's been a while since I had a good one. But I used to, and I can't remember any names. I get into this whole aspect of of like Stephen King's writing book, and I used to read like books on production and movie making and all that, because I just got fascinated by that process in the same spirit of writing. I can't even remember what they were, but I used to kind of get into those kind of
Yeah.
production books as well.
So for me, one of those that's sort of a blend is Moneyball. And
Yes.
look, it's no secret that I'm not the world's biggest baseball fan. I think I told you this, but like when I first took when they were 8 and 10, my boys to a baseball game, we got there early. We saw, the warm up and stuff. Game started, and about the third inning, my 10-year-old said, "Hey, Dad, when's the game gonna start?" we were in the third inning. So
Oh
it's not the
man.
world's most exciting game, in my opinion, but Moneyball is one of my absolute favorite books. And it actually, I think, had a big impact on me from a business perspective, because it really has you think about, what are the things that you're doing, your business is doing, your industry is doing, that are just the way it was, or less relying on data, more relying on hunches. And well, that's what this person should seem like. And so I've read Moneyball multiple times, and I absolutely love it. Michael Lewis is the author.
Yeah, no, yeah, I forget about that. Moneyball is great, but in terms of the book and also of course, the movie
Mhm.
as well too. But and that reminds me too. One book that I guess you could call it business, but it's I guess in the same spirit of Moneyball, Soccernomics. So think about Moneyball for soccer,
Okay.
and one of my kids was totally into the sport. I read it as well too. But it's great. But if you're into soccer and you like Moneyball, it's a must do. But what I love about that is it really talks about the global aspect of the business model and getting into the
Mm.
breakdowns in terms of what sort of corner kicks create a better yield on producing a score, and then gets into the economics of the sport. So actually, I kind of geeked out on that one too. I love that one.
Love that. I love that. And perfect that you have Soccernomics.
Yeah, of
Love
course. Yeah.
it. So I have three business books that are at the very, very top of my list. The first is all Patrick Lencioni books. Pretty much I love. But Five Dysfunctions of a Team is my absolute favorite. Did you ever read that one?
I've not.
Yeah. I recommend that to so many people, whether you're running a company or managing a team or on a team. I think that one's fantastic. The second book is Great by Choice by Jim Collins. His Good to Great and Built to Last are
Yeah.
more popular, but Great by Choice, I just had my leadership team read it this year. I found that one to be most relevant to me and what I'm trying to do. And then the third is The Great Game of Business, which we've talked about. But in terms of running a company, it has taught me the most about how to run a disciplined, results driven, we're all in this together type of business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to go out there for the world, for all our friends who've written books.
Yes, of
I've
course.
excluded you if I haven't really, because all of a sudden all these other books, all these other titles of people I wasn't even thinking about have coming to the top of my mind as they start sending me hate mail. But it's interesting in terms of the type of business books, and I guess some you could say maybe aren't business books. They really are. They're more just general nonfiction as well. And maybe I could have mentioned it before, but I'm a huge fan of all the Malcolm Gladwell
Yep.
books,
Yep.
and like Outliers. Actually brought
Right.
it out here so I didn't get it wrong, and they had this whole series with Blink and Tipping Point, and just getting to the psychology of how people thinks, or just how
Yeah.
randomness is power, all those elements. I'm a big fan of those, and which probably is no surprise to you. The the Adam Grant originals, which it really spoke to me. And how could I not like a book where, of course, Adam Grant's a great writer and of course great columnist, but when the subtitle is How Nonconformists Move the World.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
and by the way, I think I didn't mention it before, but I've actually backed off on a lot of business books, because as I start writing, or as I've been writing this book or getting ideas for it, I think you and I have talked about it offline before. I'm so worried, but I don't want to inadvertently capture an idea to, I
Hmm.
just want to try to create my own original stream of thought. So I've actually backed off, but these are pretty powerful and really kind of in line. And then there's one book that um, I read a little while ago, and I got a chance to meet the guy. But this is a perfect blend of my passion for disruption and innovation and creativity, and also movie business. So Ed Catmull, who's a former president of Pixar I think he's
Creativity Inc.
still, Creativity Inc.
It's amazing.
And I got to meet him at a Fast Company event some years back. In fact, I think it was the event that I actually first met Tristan Walker at many years ago in San Francisco. And I talk so much about how movie making is, there's so much aspects of that collision of the creative forces with pragmatic business forces to create some great output. And he does an incredible job with, of course, using stories that people know so well of movie making and how to drive that creative force within your business. So I love that book and just that whole story in general.
That's a fantastic one. And then I have to mention, since you said that, thinking about this year, like I think Bob Iger's The Ride of a Lifetime might
I
be.
have to read that one.
It might be and I actually listened to it. So Audible for me on that one. Such an amazing story of Disney and what they did there. So yeah, no, look, I just wanted to chat for a few about some books that we're reading. Perhaps we'll do podcasts at one point. I'm totally aware that many people, I think yourself included, get content from all sorts of places, right? I have one of my friends who doesn't read many books, but he likes long form articles, and I find it much harder to get into a long form article. I want to see a headline and then maybe a couple paragraphs, move on to the next thing. So I think different strokes, but I was curious to hear some of the books that made a big impact.
And as you mentioned, podcasting is such a massive consumption, aspect as well too, but totally different. The depth of the book you can never replicate in any of those other forums.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, Jeff, I think this is great. I mean, this is good. As much as we talk all the time, I actually got some cool ideas for some things to put on my list of hopefully books that won't just sit on my shelf or in my queue on my phone. And that's what I need to do, is start replacing some of my podcasts with some of the books. But this is good and helpful. And by the way, as you hear this, for everyone, put in the comments, what are your favorite books, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, or business books, or all the above, and let's have some discussions and frankly give us some ideas. What else could we read? I think Jeff has read everything in the Library of Congress right now, so he needs help. Tell him what he hasn't read yet. And for me, I'm just starting. So anyways, so Jeff, another good discussion. We of course encourage everybody to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, and ideally both. And we look forward to seeing you again every week here on the Jeff and Alex podcast.